you're right, you could be accused of interfering. I guess what's really important for me is actually not waiting until abuse and neglect has happened, to think about alternatives to the child protection system, to thinking, could our schools become gateways to services and supports for families earlier, when families might be struggling but abuse and neglect hasn't happened yet? Could the neighbour who dropped the flyer under the door, could she have knocked on the door and become a peer connection to a mum who was desperately alone? Could a needle exchange worker?
Well, I thought about the needle exchange, as a matter of fact, and whether that would have been a classic area where, you know, the adults must have known that that mother was using to that extent and there was a child involved, surely.
We still have quite fragmented systems. So the needle exchange worker might have been seeing a young woman coming into their service.
Right.
Do they ask that, are you a parent? And actually routinely our adult treatment services don't ask, are you a parent? So those services that are coming in contact with people in trouble aren't necessarily recognising them as parents and therefore recognising children in trouble.
Sue Packer, do you just want to add to that? I mean, is the sorts of questions that you would like people to ask?
Yeah, well, the first thing is I think I don't mind if people get irritated and think you're interfering. If you don't interfere, children might be harmed. And I think this is where we have to look at the community feeling differently.
But we also know that there's an argument about over-reporting, the fact that sort of...
The thing is that we can't keep increasing reports. We have to be able to help these children long before this. If we wait till we're reporting, these children have suffered irreparable damage, which is not... It's going to change the course of their life. No matter how wonderfully resilient they are, it's going to be a different life. We have to get in beforehand.
Quickly come back to B before we move on. B, did anyone notice that you were in trouble?
I guess not. I mean...
If you think back.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite hard for me to remember my childhood. I think I've blocked quite a lot of it out. But what I do know is I may not have cried out for help in such an obvious way when I was younger because, you know, you don't know that anything's wrong. But there were signs that people could have picked up on, like at school I cried a lot and I was scared of a lot of things. So if people had been more aware of that, or that there could be child abuse, then maybe something could have come out of that. But no, there were doctors that I was seeing, you know, on a daily basis because I was so scared that things were happening to me, and never did they think to inquire further about what was going on.
OK, well, let's just take that as a good sort of segue into the fate of this little girl, who she's really, in a way, been let down by everyone, and she's clearly on her own. And it seems pretty certain that she'll end up in the child protection system. Now, will this help her have a better life, or might this, in fact, make things worse? That's the awful question I'm going to throw back to you, Sue Packer, who's, you know, the state makes the effort to step in when parents can't cope. Does it work?
It can work, but the devil is in the detail and the focus has to be on the child. Too often we'll remove a child for a while, put in a lot of supports for the family on a short-term basis, return the child, and it all goes bottom up again, which means more change in the child's life, and they're unlikely to return to the same carer. It's similarly looking at extended family. There might be a grieving, worried grandmother out there worrying about this little girl who could provide an excellent home for this child, but the system is fragmented, and a lot of it does seem to be focused on helping the parent to recover.
Just tell us what that child would be like, if you wouldn't mind, before we go any further. You know, just set us a pen picture of that little girl arriving.
Well, the thing that worries me is a child like this is often brought for a medical assessment, particularly with needles around the place. The child will be brought by strangers to see me, a stranger, in a strange place. I have almost never seen a distressed child. They come in quietly, calmly. They're vigilant, but they're quite compliant and they're not distressed. I keep thinking
composed.
Quite composed.
So it's counterintuitive. It's not quite what we
might expect. They're more used to a totally unpredictable environment where they have to do what they can to be in control. Some of these children are so overtly affectionate, it's terrifying.
Really?
Because they have learnt the best way to get grown-ups on side is to be a nice, affectionate little girl. So they'll sit on my lap, draw love hearts, tell me they love me when they've only met me 5 minutes ago. It's the level of great distress that the children have had to learn totally different social interactions, to survive. And the interactions are ones to engage adults, to give them what they can't otherwise get. And the children aren't aware of a different way of living.
No, and I mean, if I go over to Bev Orr now, who's, I think, fostered hundreds, maybe thousands of kids, you and your husband. So you may receive this child. She might arrive to you. What would she be like in your experience?
She'd be quiet, frightened, quite anxious about what's happening, quite possibly not have Polly with her and be quite anxious about Polly. And the sorts of behaviours that Sue was explaining, they would be there, but because many carers don't have the expertise that Sue has, they would not see them through the same perspective as Sue. They would be seeing this child as just being a quiet, compliant child in first instance. And it's only once they have actually got to somewhere where they feel safe that they will start to actually act out. Yes.
And then what happens?
Then it becomes challenging.
That's a character-building wild ride, is it?
It depends on the child and it depends on how you relate to the child, but it can be very character-building.
Have you ever sent a child back?
Yes.
Just
Yes.
too hard?
Yes, there was a lot of reasons for it, and we actually had other children at the time, and we just felt the mix wasn't right, because you have to think about what's in the best interests of the child.
If I asked you, and I know that there's lots of variety, but how long before a child like that would start to feel safe, you know, if you just think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, start to feel safe, and how long before a normalcy came about?
Normally it's weeks, sometimes it can be months, but we've actually experienced it after 2 days.
Really?
Yes, to the extent that we had one young person who was about 11 or 12, and we went somewhere, and because of the way that young person was behaving, we had some people say, "Oh, and how long have you had that child in your care?" And it was actually our own child that they were talking about. Because the other child had adopted this normal behaviour and was sort of in this really attached behaviour before they then went on and really started to act out.
Well, can I come to Leah Bromfield? I mean, maybe we'd all like to be fostered by Bev or learn parenting skills. But does fostering work, by and large?
Actually, there is a nice hopeful story when we've had so much sadness tonight. The majority of children who go into care actually get better over time. And our research suggests that about 75% of children who go into care find a stable placement after within the first 12 months. I think the tragedy is that for about 15 to 20%, they're chronically unstable. We don't get a stable placement for them. Some of it's behaviour problems. So we're actually really good at predicting which children this will be. If there's two placement breakdowns due to behaviour problems within the first 6 months, then we can actually know that those are the children who are going to have the most difficulty. We need to change our system so that we don't then keep trying the tried and same old solutions with those children. We don't go, well, let's give you another foster care
So it becomes
placement.
repeated failure.
Yeah, which is more and more devastating to the child.
Sure.
For those children where we know there's significant trauma, there's significant behavioural problems, we need to be looking at intensive therapeutic care for those children, not foster care with a family.
Well, in fact, Bev, I mean, you know, 33,000 kids in care. It's an incredible figure, I think.
It's a lot, isn't it?
I mean, two questions. Are we taking too many? Have we got enough carers to be there?
There is an acute shortage of carers. We also have kinship carers who are significant people to the children, and there is also an acute shortage of those because often they are families who are having trouble. And when you have a child removed from a family having trouble, often there are other members who are having trouble as well.